So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this masterclass for the World Forum for Responsible Economy. And in this masterclass, where the major economist is going to tell us what he means by the third industrial revolution. What he suggests is, of course, Jeremy Rifkin, and we're about to start within 5-10 minutes. So it gives me time to explain how we're going to proceed during this masterclass, because there'll be some interaction with you, the public, and Philippe Vasseur is going to introduce himself, and who is going to introduce this masterclass, and of course, Jeremy Rifkin. Now, during this the presentation of Philippe Vasseur and Jeremy Rifkin, you will have the opportunity to ask questions that you can do that via Twitter. So you all have your smartphones with a good idea. I hope that you all are connected, because you'll be able to ask questions directly to Jeremy Rifkin through a hashtag that should be displayed here. You have the two hashtags there next to the Twitter logo on the screen. So you can tweet your question in English or in French as you wish with the two hashtags. The first one is Ask Rifkin. So the questions that you're dying to ask. And the second one is hashtag WFRE18. So World for Responsible Economy 2018. So WFRE18. For now, Jeremy Rifkin will present the major lessons of the third industrial revolution. And for half an hour, during his presentation, I will collect the questions. I will select a few of them, and I will directly ask these questions to Jeremy Rifkin in the remaining half hour. So he gives us an hour to think about questions, posting them and selecting them, and I'll be able to ask them for you to Jeremy Rifkin. While Jeremy Rifkin and Philippe Vasseur arrive, I'll introduce myself. I should have started with that. I'm economy and a lecturer from Marseille, and I animate an economy podcast. So this is a radio program you can listen through the web, and this podcast is called Splash. And the objective of Splash is to vulgarize economy, make economy accessible to everyone, and at each episode ask an easy question like, is immigration beneficial to the economies? Are monks incredibly rich? Why are taxi drivers so obnoxious? And I use the main knowledge produced by the economic science, and I answer very simply to these questions. So 20 minutes per episode, with the objective of vulgarizing economy, should be accessible to everyone from 7 to 77. And so the main learnings of economy are useful to everyone to lighten our debates in our political and scientific debates. So, do we have speakers? I can feel I'm told to stroll for time. So you can start now asking your questions, because the Twitter account with the two hashtags is already open. So maybe you've read the books by Jeremy Rifkin, and therefore you can ask your questions. I think now I'm going to give you the floor. Here we go. Thank you. So I just wanted to say hello and tell you how we had the idea of putting Jeremy Rifkin in with the generation that's not his. It's not exactly my generation either. Jeremy Rifkin is an economist, prospectivist from the United States, who wrote a bestseller called The Third Industrial Revolution. And the Third Industrial Revolution is therefore the economy of the future, to try and have a world that is more sustainable, corresponding more to the requirements that we recognize today, even the most skeptical, and at the same time to get into this economy of the future initiated by new technology, basically your future. We're not so much concerned. So we decided in this region, with the head of the regional council and the economic players, to make this region the laboratory of the third industrial revolution, to put into practice all the ideas of Jeremy Rifkin. And this is what we are currently doing. Now, of course, when we work for the future, we work for generations that are going to be put into responsibility, or at least that will have to experience that. This means you. And this is how we got the idea of offering Jeremy Rifkin a meeting. So we said it's prohibited to the over 25. So it's supposed to be between 18 and 25. You're allowed to be under 18, but not too much above 25. So this is Jeremy Rifkin for you. You're going to listen to him. You're going to hear what he has to say, and you have all the capacity to ask questions. My role is that I'm slightly over 25, so unfortunately I am not allowed to attend this session. So I wish you an excellent afternoon. This is a rare moment, and we wanted to offer it to you, so make the most of it. Jeremy, the floor is yours. So Jeremy doesn't like to climb up to stage, but you sort it out.
Nice to be here with all of you. Thank you for coming. Here's my ground rule. Put down the iPhones now. I know some of you are having withdrawal symptoms, but you can do this. Put down the iPhones, put down the iPads. We're going to have a nice conversation. Hey, hey, hey. I'm going to start on a somber note. I hope it'll end up being a liberating reflection for all of the young people here in this great region of France. GDP is growing at a slower rate all over the world, everywhere. The reason this is happening is productivity has been declining all over the world, everywhere, for 20 years. The result, unemployment's high, especially for the millennial generation trying to find a place in this 21st century workforce. Our economists are predicting 20 more years of low productivity. And let me do the numbers. We've had two industrial revolutions in the 19th and 20th century, and here's where we stand this afternoon. Arguably, half the human race, we're far better off than our ancestors were before we began the industrial age. Granted? It's also fair to say that 40% of the human race, making $2 a day or less, are not really much better off than their ancestors were. And 1 billion people making $1 a day or less, we could say they're actually worse off than their ancestors. While half the human race has done better, the other half of the human race not so well. The very rich have really done well. This afternoon, the 7 richest people in the world, we could put them in this row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7 richest people in the world today, most of them heading up internet companies, their combined wealth now equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human beings living on Earth. That's 3.5 billion people. There's something so wrong, so dysfunctional with the way the human family is organizing itself here on this little planet. It's clear that we are in a long-term decline for the great industrial era. But now we have a more profound problem. after 2 centuries and 2 industrial revolutions, we have dug up the burial grounds of the Carboniferous era. And we took all of those assets long buried and we burned them to create the industrial civilization. Now we have spewed massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and methane and nitrous oxide. And those molecules are so thick, they're blocking the sun's heat from getting back off the earth. We are in real-time climate change. This is no longer a model or looming on the horizon. Climate change is here, in France, in every region of the world. What I'm about to describe to you is terrifying, and if what I say to you in the next minute was said to every human being on Earth at one time, we would all be motivated and driven as a human species to have one mission in mind, only one, not many: save our species, save our planet, save our fellow creatures in the next 40 to 50 years. Here's what climate change really does. Climate change affects the hydrological cycle of the Earth. We have the atmosphere, the biosphere, the lithosphere, and the hydrosphere. Our ecosystems develop on water regimes that actually scale across the planet in our clouds. That's the hydrosphere. Here's the problem. For every 1 degree that the temperature goes up on this Earth because of all those global warming emissions, for every 1 degree that temperature is going up, the atmosphere is sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground because the heat is forcing the precipitation into the clouds, and we're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds and more unpredictable, dramatic water events. Blockbuster winter snows, 8 feet in Boston for a winter. That's the new normal. We're getting flooding all over the world every spring. You've had flooding in France this week. It's happening everywhere. People are losing their lives. We have summer droughts and wildfires. The entire western part of the United States is on fire 6 months a year, from Vancouver, British Columbia to Southern California. People are dying. We had droughts here last summer, here in France, in southern France. We have hurricanes that are destroying ecosystems all over the world. We just had Michael, a hurricane, hit Florida into the Carolinas. People are still without power this afternoon. And before that, we had Florence, and we had Harvey, and we had Sandra. This is the new normal. Everywhere. Our ecosystems cannot catch up to this runaway exponential curve in the water cycles in the clouds covering the Earth, and our ecosystems are collapsing in real time. Here's what you need to know. Our scientists now tell us we are in the 6th extinction event of life on Earth. Doesn't even make the headlines. Nobody even knows. Yet this is the most dramatic moment for the human race in the 200,000 years we've been here. We have had 5 mass extinction events in the last 450 million years, way before humans were here, and each time there was a tipping point in the chemistry of the planet and really quick die out. 10 million years to get life back every time this happened. We're in the 6th extinction event, and our scientists are telling us we could lose over 50% of all the species on Earth in the next 8 decades. Yeah, you'll be here, and your children. The last time we had an extinction event of this magnitude was 65 million years ago. As my wife says, we are asleep. Last week, the United Nations panel on climate change, all the scientific bodies in the world, issued a report. It's not good. They said if we go up even a half a degree more, and if we can't control it with a half a degree more, the runaway effects of climate change could take us all pretty quick in the next 30 years. And yet we're going on as business as usual. We believe in climate change, and then we're carrying on our day-to-day activities. As my wife says, we are asleep, doing some greenwashing. Where do we go from here? We need a new economic vision for the world. It needs to be compelling. We need a game plan to deliver on the vision. It needs to come quick. We need to be off a carbon-based civilization in the time that separates you from your children. That's 20 years, 30 at the outside. This is a task like no task in history. The UN panel says they're dubious to whether we can do this. I'm here to say to you this afternoon, we still have a fighting chance to get this done. And it starts in places like Hauts de France. So we need to back up and ask the question, how do the great economic revolutions in history occur, the great paradigm shifts? If we know how they occur, we're going to get a roadmap and a compass so that the young people here in this region, the great test region of Europe, can mount a new journey for your fellow in your generation. There have been at least 7 major economic paradigm shifts in history. They're very interesting, anthropologically. And that is, at a moment of time, 3 defining technologies will emerge across a civilization and converge to create what we call in engineering a general purpose technology platform, an infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way a society manages, powers, and moves its economic life, its social life, and its governing life. What are those 3 technologies? Number 1, new communication technologies to more efficiently manage our social life, our economic life, and governance. That's obvious. That changes history. Number 2, new sources of energy to more efficiently power our economic life, our social life, and governance, and that's pretty obvious. And number 3, new modes of mobility, logistics, and transportation to more efficiently move our economic, social life, and governance. When communication revolutions join with new energy regimes and new modes of mobility and logistics, it changes the way we manage power and move our day-to-day lives. It changes our temporal spatial orientation. It changes our business models. It changes our governance. It changes our cognition. It changes our consciousness. It changes our worldview. I'm going to give you 2 quick examples. 19th century, first industrial revolution, Britain. 20th century, second industrial revolution in the United States. The Brits lead us into the first industrial revolution with a new revolution in communication called steam-powered printing. No more manual print presses. Steam-powered printing made available very cheap production of print for textbooks, for public schools, for newspapers, magazines, journals, etc. Then the Brits laid out a telegraph system in the last part of the 19th century across the British Isles. Steam-powered printing and the telegraph converge with a new source of energy in Britain, cheap coal. It's harvested by a British invention, the steam engine. Then they put the steam engine on rails, locomotives, national transport, urban life. And no sooner did they did that than France, right here in Hauts de France, became one of the first parties in on this first industrial revolution. You were quick on the continent to move on this. Second industrial revolution in the United States of America, 20th century, communication, the telephone was a really big deal. You think the internet's a big deal? Try to imagine, for the first time in all of history, people communicating virtually over thousands of miles without seeing the other person at the speed of light. Later, radio and television. In the United States, those communication technologies converge with a new source of energy, cheap Texas oil wells. Then Henry Ford put everyone on the road, cars, buses, and trucks. That second industrial revolution took the entire world through the 20th century, and it peaked July 2008. In that month, Brent crude oil hit a record price of $147 a barrel on world markets, and in July 2008, the entire global economy shut down. That was the economic earthquake of the industrial era. The collapse of the financial market and the subprime mortgages 60 days later was an aftershock. because the fictional economy couldn't stay when the real economy shut down. Why is this the real economy? Everything in this civilization depends on fossil fuels from a previous period in history. Fertilizers, fossil fuels. Pesticides, they're made out of fossil fuels. Construction materials, fossil fuels. Pharmaceutical products, fossil fuels. Synthetic fiber, power, transport, heat, and light. So when the price of oil goes over 75, 80 a barrel, watch all the other prices go up. When oil hits around 110 a barrel, watch prices become high, purchasing power slows. We are in growth shutdown now. Prices for oil shoot up, economy slows, prices of oil go down, economy moves. This is a sunset. Does anybody here believe that we are in the sunrise of the fossil fuel era? No. Where do we go from here? I'm going to share an anecdote with you. When Angela Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first couple of weeks, actually, of her new government to help her address the question, how do we grow the German economy and create jobs on her watch? First question I asked the new Chancellor in Berlin when I got there, I said, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy when your businesses are plugged in to a second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunications, fossil fuels, oil, and nuclear power, internal combustion transportation, and that infrastructure to manage power and move Germany peaked in its productivity more than 15, 20 years ago. So I said to her, you can have market reforms and labor reforms and fiscal reforms, and you can stimulate 1 million startup innovation companies like Steve Jobs. It won't make any difference. As long as your businesses are plugged into this old second industrial revolution infrastructure, centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel, nuclear power, internal combustion transport, you can't get any more productivity out of those platforms in any industrial country. That's why productivity is declining. It's the infrastructure to manage power and move life that has now peaked. So on that first day with the Chancellor, we discussed a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication, energy, and mobility to manage power and move Germany. And at the end of the day, the Chancellor said, Mr. Rifkin, we will have this third industrial revolution for Germany. Let me explain. We are on the cusp of a new convergence of communication, energy, and mobility. It's a digital revolution. It's your revolution. It's all the young people in this room. You are digital natives. The first was steam power. The second was analog electricity and oil. You're the third, the digital revolution. And it's more than your smartphones and your iPads and the social media. We have had a communication revolution in the last 27 years since the World Wide Web, which you all use. We have 3.5 people connected to the World Wide Web every day, Skyping in global classrooms, and they're speaking to each other on Facebook, and they're gaming with each other in sports, right? Pretty soon, the whole human race will be engaged within the next 10 years because China now has a smartphone for $25 with more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. There are now villages in the Amazon with more computing power on their smartphone than sent our men and women to outer space. So this communication revolution is here, and now this digital communication revolution that's in your pocket is now converging with a digitalized renewable energy internet. We now have millions of people in Europe and now in China producing their own solar and wind electricity on their homes, in their neighborhoods, through their cooperatives. And what they're not using, they're sending back on an energy internet that's digital, that acts just like your information internet. So you can share energy like you share news, knowledge, and entertainment. That's in real time. Now these two internets, the communication internet and the renewable energy internet, are now converging with a third internet, an automated sharing mobility internet made of electric and fuel cell vehicles. Those vehicles are comprised of 3D fabricated recycled material. They're already starting, the first ones. And they will be driverless, road, rail, water, air, and drone over the next decade, driverless. These three internets, the communication internet, already in your pocket, the renewable energy internet, Hauts de France is the pioneer in France and is the pioneer region now in Europe. We're beginning to build out this energy internet. And now the automated mobility internet, they ride on top of a platform called the Internet of Things. We're placing sensors in all of our built environment and in the wild environment. We've got sensors in the agricultural fields. They're checking soil salinity, the growth of the crops. We have sensors in factories and in smart warehouses and smart homes and smart cars and smart businesses, smart roads. They're picking up data. Where's that data going? Not to the cloud, and mythical cloud Silicon Valley talks about. It's going to the communication, energy, and mobility internets so that we can better manage power and move our economic, social life. By 2030, we will have built out a global brain, that's Galileo and GPS, that's the brain, and a nervous system, that's the sensors. We're creating a prothesis of the human collectivity so that we can begin to engage each other in a global nervous system, virtually and physically. You're doing it every day. You're part of this nervous system. You're all over the world every day. By 2030, we may have the opportunity for the human race to engage each other directly and bypass many of the middlemen that were the referees in the Second Industrial Revolution. In the First and Second Industrial Revolution, the infrastructures were designed to be centralized, top-down, proprietary with intellectual property, and vertically integrated. So today we've ended up with 500 global companies, and they're responsible for about 28% of the whole GDP of the world, and they only have 62 million workers. This new internet that we're talking about is not designed to be centralized. It's distributed. It is open and transparent and not closed. When you're up on the internet, the more people on the internet, the more webs you're in, the more social capital you create, right? But if you close it and monopolize it, you don't get the network effect, correct? And this third industrial revolution is designed to be laterally scaled. Your generation scales power laterally, not vertically. This means we can go from globalization top-down to glocalization, region to region to region, virtually and physically engaging each other all over the world, very cheap. This is power to the people. This is the subsidiarity principle of Europe come to practice. This is each region being able to control its own economic destiny and work in tandem with other regions locally, nationally, globally, virtually, physically. This is happening in real time, just beginning. While we're excited about a global brain and nervous system, your generation is comfortable with talking to people and interacting with folks all over the world, we're also pretty scared. While there's a leap forward in democracy and economic activity, how do we deal with the dark net? The dark net is as impressive as the bright net. How do we maintain network neutrality when everyone here is connected? How do we ensure governments don't purloin this global brain and nervous system for political purposes, like hacking the US presidential elections? Huh? How do we ensure that internet companies that you and I use don't monopolize this internet, commodify all of our data every day, and then exploit it for third parties who can then tell us what to wear, what to buy, and what to do? How do we ensure data security and privacy? How do we ensure against climate events that can take down the system? We now have power systems in the western part of our country that have accidentally, during drought, creating wildfires that then get out of control, and then the power systems go down. How do we prevent malware and terrorism? This is the dark net, and what I'm saying to this generation in this room, it's as impressive as the bright net, and it's going to mean 3 generations of struggle between you, your children, and grandchildren to ensure that we build redundancy into the system, that it maintains a very distributed nature. So if there's any attack in one part of the system, you can regroup, reaggregate, go off grid. But let's assume this afternoon we're going to be able to address the dark net. Here's the value of the bright net. Let's say that when you get out of school here, you create a little cooperative or nonprofit or small business. You can go up on that system and have a transparent picture of all the data coming through Hauts de France because it stays open. You have it available to you. Then you can strip out the data you care about for your small business. Let's say you have a cooperative car sharing service. Strip out the data coming through the system for that little cooperative car sharing service. Then you can mine that data with your own analytics. You can create your own apps. So you can dramatically increase your aggregate efficiency and productivity, reduce your marginal cost and ecological footprint, so that you can compete on an even playing field and even outcompete some of the biggest companies in the business because you're local and you're global. There are now young people introducing these cooperatives all over the world and small businesses. It's just starting now in the last few years. So what's happening now is that the digitalization of communication, energy, and mobility, and the Internet of Things is dramatically changing the marginal cost of producing goods and services. Now, fixed costs are the cost of setting up a production. Marginal cost is once you set up your production and put it all in, then it's the cost of producing each unit, all right? We've always said in economics that the optimum market is where you sell at marginal cost. We just never expected a digital revolution so dramatic in its productivity, it could plunge the marginal cost to near zero. Then there's no profits, and you're in another economy. And that other economy is called the sharing economy. Sound familiar? It's all the digital natives in this room. The sharing economy was birthed by the digital revolution. It's moving aside the capitalist market. Now what's happening is capitalism, when your margins get low and your profits get low, you have to move from markets to networks. Because a market's too slow. You have a seller, you have a buyer, you make a transaction, then you start over again. But when the marginal profits are very low, you have to move to services that flow 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Then, even with low margins, you move from markets to networks, from ownership to access, from sellers and buyers to users, and from consumerism to sustainability. But alongside this shift in capitalism, we're also seeing the birth of the sharing economy. How many here in this room in the last month have produced or shared a video or music that they produced or a news blog or social media in the last 30 days and put it on the web? Let's see a raise of hands. Nobody is using their cell phones. How many here today have produced a video and shared it with their friends on the web, or a blog, or music, or contributed to Wikipedia? What do we have? Take a look around. That's the sharing economy. That's not in the GDP. Not counted in the GDP. That is the sharing economy. So, what's happening is we now have a whole generation like you all over the world. You're sharing music. Remember that Korean performance artist a few years ago that put out that little song and dance, and 1 billion people came to his website in 60 days? It didn't cost him anything except to power up his phone. We now have millions of people producing and sharing their news blogs, their social media. We have democratized education with Wikipedia. Millions of people are constructing the knowledge of the world free with each other. And the accuracy is really good. We have millions of young people taking massive open online college courses taught by the best professors in the universities. They're getting college credits. It's free. Whole industries have been disrupted by zero marginal cost in the sharing economy. Music, book publishing, many industries. But whole new businesses have emerged, not just Google, not just Facebook, not just Twitter. There's thousands of startup companies, some profit, some nonprofit, and they're engaged in the platforms, the analytics, the big data. We thought there'd be a firewall. While we could understand how zero marginal cost and the sharing economy would affect the virtual world, entertainment, news, knowledge, games, we didn't see it going over the firewall to the physical world. The Internet of Things breaks the firewall. We have millions of people now in Europe and now China producing their own solar and wind right now this afternoon, And what they're not using, they're sharing back on an energy internet in the sharing economy right now. We have millions of young people sharing car sharing services. Now they're controlled by big companies, but there are local ones like blah, blah. Much better idea. So let's go back to Germany. What's happened since that first conversation with the chancellor? Between 35 and 40% of all the electricity in Germany now is near zero marginal cost solar and wind. Right now. We're going to be 100% before 2040, off fossil fuels. What's interesting is the fixed cost. The fixed cost of producing a solar watt back in the 1970s was $78. One fixed solar watt, $78. Do you know what it is this afternoon? It's not $78, 35 to 40 cents. It's on an exponential curve like computers. When I was a child in the 1940s, we didn't even have computers, and the first computer was invented at my university, University of Pennsylvania. But at that point, the chairman of IBM calculated that we only needed 5 computers for the world. They're too expensive. 5. I got that wrong. What they didn't realize is engineers at Intel were able to double the capacity on those little chips you have every 2 years and half the cost. Now $25 smartphones. What's happening in energy is similar. The fixed costs have gone down to 35, 40 cents, and we now have power companies buying long-term contracts for power at 5 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And here's what you're not hearing. Inside the power and utility companies, they've been disrupted just like the music industry and newspapers and book publishing. They're in panic. Citibank, the great banking Bank of New York, did a study 2 years ago and said we have $100 trillion in stranded assets in the fossil fuel industry because solar and wind are so cheap, they're now competing and under the price in many places of fossil fuels. $100 trillion. That's the largest bubble in world history. Stranded assets. We don't need them. And the Bank of England president, Mr. Carney, met with Lloyd's of London, the great insurance company, this past year, and he said, this is the plague. This is the elephant in the room for the next crisis. How do we deal with $100 trillion in stranded assets in the oil industry? This is the great transition from the second to the third industrial revolution. But in Germany and now in France and other countries, once you pay the fixed cost for these energies, you know the marginal cost is near zero. Do you know the wind and the sun have not sent a bill here in Hauts de France to anybody? Nobody's gotten a bill. There's no invoice. The wind and the sun are free. Free. So what happens in France when your businesses begin to plug in here in this region to a third industrial revolution infrastructure, and that energy you're getting from the sun and wind is nearly free to manage your entire value and supply chains of this region? How does a second industrial revolution country compete with that? They can't. So, who's creating all this new energy? I'll use Germany example because I'm going to end up with Hauts de France because you're moving ahead of many other countries and regions. But I'm going to use them as an example for now. Across Germany, farmers, small businesses, neighborhood associations, they all created electricity cooperatives, just like you, just normal folks. They went to the banks, they got the loans. The banks knew they'd pay back by the energy they generated. They're making 96% of all the electricity now in the country that's solar and wind, renewables. The big 4 power companies of Germany, they're producing 4%. They're out. They can't scale it because you have to collect the sun everywhere. You have to collect the wind everywhere. You have to collect the heat under the ground everywhere. 4 power companies can't do that. Everybody does where they live, where they work, where they have their lives. Does this mean the end of the power and transmission companies? No, but they have to change their business model. So in Germany, about 4 or 5 years ago, E.ON, one of the great companies, asked if I would debate their chairman. I did, and I said, look, you're not leaving the second industrial revolution tomorrow morning, but the disruption's here, just like the music industry faced with the World Wide Web and newspapers and book publishing. You're going to have to amortize out that second industrial revolution model for energy, because it's a stranded asset, over a period of 20 years. And you have to build a new model for a third industrial revolution. And the new model, as an electricity company, you make more money by not generating any electricity, because all of us are going to generate the electricity. By the way, in 25 years from now, everybody will be a generator of electricity, and when they have sun, they'll share it with someone that doesn't. When someone has the wind, they'll share it with someone that doesn't. When someone has the heat, they'll share it with someone that doesn't. You know we're putting solar in paint. You just paint it on your house. We're putting solar in glass and windows. You just put it on. So everyone's going to be producing this. So I said, the power companies, you're not going to be producing this electricity, and you're going to make more money by selling less and less and less electricity. So Mr. Tyson said, wait a minute, we're not producing it, and we're making more by selling less. Can't figure that out. What I said to him is, you're going to set up partnerships with thousands and thousands of businesses, and you're going to help them manage the energy flowing through their supply chains and their value chains. You're going to help them with their analytics and big data. You're going to help them increase their aggregate efficiencies and productivity with that big data, so that they can then share some of that gains back with the power company in performance contracts. 5 years ago, Mr. Tyson said, won't do. Last year, he put his fossil fuels on the market. Nobody's buying. And they're moving to energy services. Not just Europe, now China. When Premier Lee, President Xi and Premier Lee came into office, Premier Lee said that in his official biography that he had read the book Third Industrial Revolution, which I wrote a number of years ago. And he instructed the central government to move on the narrative I'm describing to you this afternoon. They move really quick. I've been working with the People's Republic of China and the European Union, but in China, to show you how fast they move, 11 weeks after the first visit I had there, they announced $82 billion to actually digitalize the entire electricity grid of China in the current 5-year plan, so millions of Chinese people could produce their own solar and wind, bought by their own solar and wind companies, and shared across an energy internet. They're producing 5 million electric vehicles right now in this 5-year plan. Watch Europe, watch China. The coming together of the communication internet with the energy internet makes possible the mobility and logistics internet. How many of you here have used a car-sharing service, blah, blah, or Lyft, or any of them? You are a real problem to us. You have created a real problem, because, don't you understand, we built the entire second industrial revolution on making automobiles and selling them. Apparently, you don't want to own an automobile. That's grandma and grandpa. Two cars sitting in the driveway, waxing them once a month, not using, or at the office. You want, see if I have this right, digital natives, you want mobility, you want access to mobility in car-sharing networks. You don't care about ownership in vehicles in static markets, correct? The problem is, for every car you're sharing, we are eliminating 15 cars. This is a big deal. There's 1 billion cars, buses, and trucks in the world choking us in traffic. They are the #1, 3 cause of global warming emissions. #1 is buildings. But here in Hauts de France, we're going to retrofit every single building in this region so we can transform them. But does anyone know what the #2 cause of climate change is? #1 is all the buildings using all the energy. #3 is transport. We always talk about them. #2, no one seems to know. What is the #2 cause of human-induced global warming emissions? What? Animals. What kind? Cows. So I wrote a book in 1990 saying that cows are #2. They're probably #1. And the scientific community, the agriculture community, they all went berserk. They said, that's the stupidest thing we ever heard of. We now know. The science is in. I love cows. My wife and I are animal rights people. We love cows. But there's 1.3 billion cows out there. They take up 27% of the entire land mass of the world. And the methane they produce is 23 times more potent per molecule, that methane, than CO2. And when they poop, the feces, the nitrous oxide, is 280 times more powerful per molecule. But you never hear anybody in the environmental movement or any government leader talking about how we have to reduce ourselves on meat diet, move down the food chain to a more vegetarian diet so we can save our planet, save our species. You never hear it. All right, number 3 is vehicles. We're going to eliminate probably 800 million of those billion vehicles in the next generation. The other 200 million vehicles will be electric, they'll be fuel cell, they'll be 3D printed, they'll be driverless, very low to zero marginal cost. All of these 3 internets work on top of the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things is every building in Hauts de France. This is the Internet of Things. Every one of these buildings in this region is a node, and every building has to be totally retrofitted so it can become efficient, then it becomes a node. And every node is a distributed data center. So you can collect your own data and share it with each other in blockchain networks, and it doesn't all go to Google, Twitter. It goes to who you like in the securitized blockchain networks. You with me? Every building is a node that's a distributed data center. Every building is a node in which you generate your own electricity from the sun, the wind, the heat under the ground. Every building is a power charging station for your electric and fuel cell vehicles. All those nodes connect communication, energy, and mobility across the region, across France, across Europe, across Eurasia. This is the revolution. This is power to the people. This cannot be controlled by any centralized power because you can go off-grid, you can shift, you can re-aggregate, you can blockchain. There's no centralized power that can control a billion people across Eurasia. This essentially is the framework. In Europe last year, we announced Smart Europe. We have a similar plan that we announced called China Internet Plus, and it's basically the narrative I outlined. But now let me talk about this region. This third industrial revolution is going to involve every industry, not only here but around the world. You need the ICT, the electric utilities. You need construction and real estate to retrofit the buildings. You need advanced fabrication manufacturing for 3D printing of your materials. We need the life science industries to find alternatives to petrochemical products. We need telecom for 5G big data, 5G big data. Every industry is going to be involved, and it means jobs. It means millions of jobs. Robots and AI will not decommission the fossil fuel infrastructure that has to be decommissioned as stranded assets. Humans have to do that, semi-skilled, skilled, and professional. Robots and AI, they won't retrofit the buildings in Hauts de France. You're not going to see robots putting in the insulation and all of that delicate work that has to be done. That's semi-skilled, skilled, and professional labor. Robots and AI will not dig down under the ground and put 5G big data cables under the ground. Humans have to do that. Robots and AI will not assemble a wind turbine. Have you ever watched men and women go up there and assemble a wind turbine? There's no robot that could ever do that, or the solar panels. So it means industry, it means jobs, and what I've just outlined to you is the agenda for the digital natives in this room. How do we get there? Now I want to talk about your region and the responsibility of the students in this room today. I'm really serious about what I'm about to tell you. No region in the world up until 5 years ago has scaled this revolution. We have 9,000 cities that signed up to the Paris Climate Accords, and they can tell you about their LEED buildings, their hydrogen buses, their bike paths. All sounds good, but none of it is more than pilot projects that look good on paper for the press. So back, I guess it was in 2012, President Pécheron of this region called me up and he said, "We're the Rust Belt of northern France. We used to be the greatest industrial region in France and in Europe. We're on bad times for about 40 years. We don't want our young people moving out. We want to deal with climate change, new jobs, new opportunities. We love this region. We've been here for a long time. What can we do?" He said, "Can you do a roadmap for us?" I said, "No." I said, "No, we can't do a roadmap for you. We'll work with you, but you create your own roadmap. And here's the conditions in which we will work with you. We asked Mr. Pecheron and Philippe Vasseur, the Chamber of Commerce, we said, you need to make sure that every municipality in this region comes on board. Every little town, every territory, every municipality, every political party. You bring all the universities on board. You bring all the high schools on board. You bring all the chambers of commerce on board. And if the whole region says that they will create a roadmap and a 30-year construction site over 3 generations, them, you, and your kids will come in and work side by side with you. And the deal was, accept the infrastructure, communication, energy, mobility, internet, the IoT, but then customize it to your municipalities, to your rural areas, to your farms, to your businesses, so you have something that resembles what you want for your region, but it's the infrastructure that allow you to then cross to other regions. You with me? I didn't know if this could happen. We had done other regions before this. They were okay, but we never scaled. So what I was suggesting here is something, a new form of politics that had not been done. And I didn't know if this could be done here. Usually you think of your local government and your local ministries creating projects and then implementing and getting some, public feedback, correct? And you wait for your national government to create projects, and then you either accept it at the voting booth or not, correct? We said, national governments, they're starting to deconstruct. We're losing confidence in many governments. So I said, what you need to do is the region, at this point it was Nord-Pas-de-Calais, but now the region of Hauts de France, with Picardy, you have to reach out and create democratic assemblages of thousands of people. Thousands. With hundreds of them in the primary committees across industries, across interest areas, across generations, and then we will work with you side by side for a year, and you will create the roadmap based on this architecture. It's your roadmap. Most governments don't like to hand over this power because they say, well, then we lose power. But President Pecheron realized that power is something that should be distributed so everybody takes part, not at the voting booth, but every day in their future. And so we began this experiment, we did the roadmap, and it worked. And then President Bertrand came into office. Now it's a different political party. And what was so interesting is the first thing President Bertrand did is he asked President Pecheron, would he be part of the advisory committee to keep the work going? That's unheard of in Europe. One party asking the other party, saying, this is not about political parties, this is the future of our children. And President Bertrand said, if this were the first industrial revolution, or the second, if one party said we want it, would the other party say, no, we don't like it? Of course not. So President Bertrand came in and he said, not only are we going to carry on this work, we're going to increase it, escalate it, and move more and more people into this. And now we have, if you will, across political lines, across the region, everybody engaged. This morning, we had territories from all over the region come together. All over the region, Hauts de France. You have 1,200 projects in place now. You were the Rust Belt in 2012. Nobody paid any attention to you. You know what you are now? 3 years later, you were awarded by the European Commission and the Committee of the Regions as the lead entrepreneurial region of the 350 regions in Europe, and you did it in 36 months. 1,200 projects, there are thousands of employment, jobs, and you go to a little place like my friend Jean-Francois Caron out in the mining region. Have you been out there, the mining region? Well, what's interesting is they have trained several thousand grandchildren of coal miners, and you know what they're doing now for a living? They're retrofitting buildings and putting solar on them. Employment. So what we have here is an interesting experiment, kind of a peer experiment where democracy is now becoming lateral because the infrastructure is lateral, distributed, open, transparent. You want a political infrastructure that's open, lateral, transparent, and involves everyone. So what's going to be the juice that makes this go? Everybody in this room this afternoon. I'm not just saying this to say this. I don't know if we'll succeed. I won't be here to see this, but I'm telling you, This is a huge responsibility on the young people in this region. You cannot afford to fail. We have delegations coming in here from all over the world looking at what you're doing with all of these projects. You have to scale it. You have to stay in this region. You have to engage in all the new opportunities and the businesses and the research, because we're so late on this time frame for climate change. If this fails, we're in trouble. We have a second region now in Netherlands, from Rotterdam to The Hague, 23 cities. They're now in their third year, but you're farther along. We have all of Luxembourg now in their third year, but you are the lead. This is a huge responsibility. This is about saving our planet. Let me back up for a moment. I don't think it's just about technology. I'm not a utopian on technology. I've been critical of a lot of technologies in my lifetime. We have to have something change quicker. It's not just the technology. It's there. We can do it. We have to change our consciousness, our cognition, our worldview, how we think about who we are. I am guardedly hopeful. That's all. I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. I think this is a real race against time with climate change, and I'm guardedly hopeful. And here's why. I have noticed, and you tell me if this is correct, among the young people in this room, and I've seen it around the world, a change in consciousness that's pretty revolutionary, even though not spoken. And there are three particular areas that interest me. Your views about freedom, your views about power, your views about identity to community. Those are pretty substantial categories of how people think. My generation and previous generations, back to the beginning of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Era, we were clear about freedom from the French Revolution, the American Revolution on. Freedom is the ability to be self-sustainable, to be sufficient, self-sufficient, to be autonomous, to be an agent to ourselves, to be able to take care of our own destiny, to be an island. And we believe our fellow human beings have the right to do the same thing. And we create governments so everyone can have the right to pursue their life as they like, correct? Let me suggest that for the digital natives in this room, what I've just said is a death knell. For you, freedom is not exclusivity and isolation and autonomy. For you, freedom is inclusivity and access, right? It's not ownership, it's access. It's not exclusivity, it's inclusivity, because for you, freedom is measured in terms of the ability to flourish. And flourish means to be a network after network, some physical, some virtual, where you're engaged with all sorts of different players around the world and around the region. And freedom is the ability to put your talent in, your social capital, add it to others, and get the network effect. Is that somewhat correct? Power. We grew up to believe power is a pyramid. All of the generations before you. It's a pyramid, the one to the many. But your generation of digital natives, you're on the web every day sharing that talent in these webs, and it's the more in, the more everybody benefits. And finally, this is probably the most important, the shift in the notion of community. I grew up in a post-Westphalian geopolitical world. Every nation is sovereign and autonomous. And every citizen of every nation is sovereign and autonomous and a citizen of that nation. So each citizen competes with every other citizen for scarce resources in the marketplace, zero-sum game. It's competition. We're all competing. And we protect our autonomy. Our nation states are autonomous and sovereign. They compete with other nation states in the marketplace or the battlefield for scarce resources, zero-sum game. And I'll remind you, here in northern France, we fought 2 world wars over fossil fuels. Coal in the Ruhr Valley between Germany and France, and oil across Asia, Russia, et cetera. Yeah, a lot of people died. We have a younger generation, and see if I've got this right in this room, younger generation, and you're coming home with biosphere consciousness, not geopolitical consciousness. The biosphere is that small stretch from the stratosphere to the lithosphere, to the ground and the water, where all the chemistry of the planet interacts with the biology of the planet, through the hydrosphere, the biosphere, the atmosphere, the lithosphere, and the magnetosphere. It's a system. It's only 19 kilometers. So here, your real community is between the ground here and 19 kilometers up across the region. That's the planet that has to be saved. We have young people coming home in this region. I've talked to some of them. They're saying to their parents, well, why is Dad using so much water while he's shaving? We got drought here. Certainly seen that in southern France. They're saying to their parents, why is the television on in the other room? We haven't been in there for 3 weeks. It's just noise. Turn it off. They're saying to their parents, why do you have 2 cars? Why don't you car share one, give the other one up? They're saying to their parents, and this is the one I'm particularly fond of. I know this is going to cause problems in France, but I'm going to say it. We do have young people coming home in France and even in this region, and they're asking where the piece of beef came from on the dinner table. Did that hamburger or piece of beef come from a rainforest? Did they have to burn the trees for 6 inches of topsoil in that rainforest to get 1 cow grazed for that piece of beef? And when those trees are burned, you know there are rare species of animal life that only live in that particular tropical rainforest. They extinct. And when the trees are burned to graze the cow for the piece of beef on that dinner table tonight, that means the trees aren't there to absorb CO2 from industrial emissions from our factories and our homes and our cars. And that means some farmer can't feed her children 10,000 miles away in India or some subsistence region because she's getting flooding in the spring, summer droughts, and wildfires, and she can't feed her kids. What we're learning in this generation is ecological footprint. It's not academic, it's not theoretical. We can actually measure, and some of you in the high schools may have gone out and measured your ecological footprint. Everything we do, every moment of the day and night, even when we're asleep, affects some other human being, some other family, some other fellow creature or species, and the earth we live in. What we're realizing, the cruel lesson of climate change, it's the cruelest lesson in history. We're all deeply interconnected at every level of our existence. There is no way to escape, to be autonomous, to be sovereign, to be independent. We have agency, but so does every other part of our planet has agency. What you're beginning to do in Hauts de France is you're beginning to help the human race grow up. The question is, will we get there in time? It really depends on you, and when you become parents, your children and grandchildren in this generation. So here's my hope. Do not let us down. We're going to have a lot of people looking to this region all over the world. You started something. You've got to close the deal over the next 30 years. That means the universities and the high schools, you have to be involved at every step of this rollout. I know the 7 universities are involved. I know Catholic University is engaged in the other universities. I know that your 200 high schools have been somewhat involved, but it's not enough. When you leave here this afternoon, go back there tomorrow, get the committees moving, start to take a look at what you can do, find out all the projects that are going on in your community and region, begin to talk to your parents and your relatives and your friends. One more thing. Most of the people, students, won't be here today. So we put out a film. How many of you have watched Vice films? Vice Media, V-I-C-E? Okay, a lot of people. We have a film out. It's pretty much this talk. It came out about 7 months ago. We got almost 3 million people that have viewed it at this point. It's all millennials around the world. It's in 19 languages, including French. Share the film. Then share your life. We are counting on you to be the lighthouse for France and Europe. And I believe this region's already been declared the lighthouse region of France, correct? This is the lighthouse region of France. And I think this is the highest employment gains, isn't it, in France right now? Highest employment gains. This region did it in 5 years. Damn good, really good. So what I want you to do is double the efforts, spread the word, and what will happen hopefully in 3, 4 generations now when your grandchildren look back at you, they're going to ask you what you did. And they're going to see that you gave your life, not just something you do on your spare time, gave your life and worked in your profession and your career to turn this region into an ecological society off carbon and show the world what can be done. When your grandchildren look back and ask what Grandma and Grandpa did, you can say, we understood what we needed to do. We looked around and no one else was doing it. We decided to do it, and then everybody else followed. And we changed the complexion of Europe. We changed the complexion of the world, and we gave new hope to reflourish this planet. It's not just that your great-grandchildren have a right to be here. Our fellow creatures have a right to be here. My wife and I are strong animal rights activists. They have a right to their moment on this planet. So do your great-great-great-grandchildren. This little blue planet is so strange. There's nothing like it that we've been able to perceive in the universe. The mission here, in this room, show the world it can be done. Do it today, do it tomorrow, and make sure your grandchildren continue the task in the 21st century. Replenish this earth, create an ecological society and a just community so the human race can learn to live together in peace in this beautiful blue oasis in the universe. Good afternoon. We're doing questions, right? Claude? Claude? Right here. No, let's go. Right here. Right here.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Rifkin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rifkin. We'll be able to do the second part of this masterclass.
So keep your headphones if you want the translation. So during your presentation, the audience asked a bunch of questions on Twitter, and I selected some of them, and we are waiting for your answer. So first question about Hauts de France. So we had coal here for the second industrial revolution. So what are now the main assets of Hauts de France to contribute, to engage this third revolution?
Coal is over everywhere. It's a stranded asset. There's not going to be any more coal production. There is now. Every country, even China, is trying to get out of coal. You have all the assets you need. You have all the energy you need right here in this region. It's called the sun and the wind and the heat under the ground. You've got a lot of geothermal heat. You've got enough energy to the end times in your sun and the wind and the heat. So does every region of the world. University of California has done a study of every country in the world and their potential for solar and wind alone. Every country can make this. If Germany can do it with all of that bad weather, certainly France can do it with all the good weather. So you have all the energy you need. And you know what? When people say, you know, solar, wind, oh, I don't like the look of windmills. When I see a beautiful wind turbine on a farm, I see beauty. I don't see an obstruction, all right? It all depends on one's aesthetics. When I see a coal power plant, I don't see the same, I don't have the same vision of elegance in our industry. So, you know, we really have to move to solar and wind and to geothermal heat here and to biofuels, but they have to be the right biofuels, the ones that have net energy that's good and not bad. So yeah, biofuels, geothermal, save a small hydro, solar and wind.
Thank you for your answer. So second question, I got a lot of questions about social inequalities and social issues. For example, what can do women to contribute, or what can be the role of women and racial minorities to contribute to this revolution?
Well, this is kind of interesting because one of the big issues going on in the world today is gender inequality, especially in the developing world. It's bad everywhere, but in the developing world, you have these very deep patriarchal societies where the women are literally the slaves and the children. What we forget is an interesting kind of lesson in history. There was a technology that came on in the late 19th century that helped spur the suffragette women's movement. You know what it was? Electricity. This is an untold story. Because before electricity around the world, women were yoked to the hearth. They literally had to keep the fires burning. They had to carry the water. They had to do all those chores, so they could not go beyond 4th grade in school. They had to be home, carrying the energy, carrying the water, the load. When electricity came in, it freed women in Europe and America to go to higher grades of education. They didn't need them to be the slaves at the home. And as they became more independent, electricity allowed for new skills in the marketplace, not upper body skills, but mental skills, and all sorts of new employment. So the rise of the suffragette movement was greatly assisted in the last part of the 19th century and the early 1900s by electricity. Why do I say that? In the developing world, show me a place where there's no electricity, and I'll show you the most enslaved of women on the planet. In sub-Saharan Africa, in parts of rural India, all over the world where there is no electricity. You can give out millions of condoms, it won't make any difference. Because what happens in these patriarchal families is more kids mean more people on board in case some die. So what's happening in rural India now, in sub-Saharan Africa, is women with microcredit are creating electricity cooperatives. And I don't mean just a few. This is happening in the last 2 years, after I wrote that first book on this. Last 2 years, women are getting microcredit. They're setting up electricity cooperatives, and they're going into rural villages, the women, and they're giving each hut a solar panel. The solar panel gives you light, so you have light. You're in the 21st century, and it gives you power for a cell phone, and they lease you the panel and the cell phone. The cell phone then allows you once a week to put $1 into the credit union, or once every 2 weeks, to keep the lease. So you don't have to travel for 3 weeks to electricity. You've got it right there. Then you pay off the panel and the cell phone, and that's cheaper than the kerosene you're using now. And that kills people, kerosene. It's poisonous. They're connecting up each roof with wires across 200 maybe houses in a village and putting in a cement battery storage. You know how much this costs for 200 houses? About $3,000. And so what we found is that the developing countries with the big gender, really big gender bias, they're the fastest movers. Why? This is something we learned in development. We didn't see any need for cell phones in sub-Saharan Africa or rural India because they didn't even have any electricity. Why cell phones? The weirdest thing happened. People began to buy fake cell phones just to say they had them. Lots of people. Then we put the cell towers in. And here's the lesson we learned in development, that their liability is their asset. In developing countries, total poverty, their liability is their asset, meaning they have no infrastructure. That's an asset. Because it's easier to build this infrastructure from scratch with new protocols, new regulations, new codes, than to take the old infrastructure we're doing in the industrial world and try to transform it and change the regulations, codes, and standards. So watch rural India. India is on fire with this third industrial revolution, and watch China, watch sub-Saharan Africa. And again, it has very much to do with gender. As the women are putting in these cooperatives, they're getting more education, fewer babies because they're more independent, and we're beginning to just see the end of the terrible gender discrimination that we're seeing in much of the developing world. That's good news, that's heartening.
So you just mentioned very interesting local initiatives by women, like in India or in other parts of the world. But every time there are these local initiatives, we have the feeling that the big companies want to monopolize it, want to capture everything we try to create. How can we fight those big companies?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. Well, I'm going to tell you a story that happened last year. You know Google, Google, Google. I love Google. It's the magic box. I do all my research by Google. I don't know something, especially at my age, I go to the magic box. However, When everyone has to go to the magic box and there's no alternative, it starts to look like a global monopoly, correct? Same with Facebook. I know many high school kids are now dropping out of Facebook all over the world. In my country, I think it's true in France, they're just getting out. But if everyone has to communicate through Facebook, it starts to look like a global monopoly. And same with Amazon on logistics, all right? So what do we do in this relation to the big companies? So here's what happened. Google was setting up a data center in Canada. So it bid for a project in Toronto. They had a brownfield, you know, that wasn't developed, and they were given the data center. Then they said, we've got a small business here that they had recently bought, and not only will we have our data center there, but if you agree, Canada, we'll set up a little miniature city, you know, that you can live in. It'll, not a big one, maybe some square blocks, and we'll put in all this infrastructure that I'm talking about to you this afternoon. And it was a big deal, and the country was there, and the politicians. You know what happened the next day? Everyone in Canada went berserk. We do not want our cities privatized by Google. Does this sound familiar? And now it doesn't look like it's going to happen because the backlash was huge, huge. Does that mean Google has no role to play? Of course they can have a role. Many companies can have a role. But you have to protect these webs, these infrastructures as public utilities. These are commons. These are governed as commons. And that means here in this region, you have to make the decision on the electricity grid, the mobility internet, the energy internet, the mobility internet. You decide as a region with all those thousands of people in all the territories jointly how your data can be used, what data can't be used, under what conditions. What the price is for using the services, what the price isn't. This is called public utilities. Now, those utilities can be private, but they have to be treated as public utilities. And so I remember when we first started this project here, I did not know this, but one of your regional governors here in the region, one of your regional people, we had EDF here, ERDF, because they were on the ground. To their credit, they said, we'd like to be engaged with you. They were right there. They're helping out. But at the get-go, I learned that every city, did you know this in France, owns the last mile of your utility lines? And you lease it out to ERDF and EDF under long-term contracts. You can take it back. What I'm saying here is that there's lots of companies we work with and lots we won't. We have a lot of global companies that work with us, some don't. We don't mind if they help build out, they have expertise. We don't mind if they help manage. But I think most business should be local and regional. So one of the things in this master plan that's developed over 5 years, you've ensured all business should start local. If you want to bring in global partners, it's on your terms, not their terms. And you've done it. And Philippe Vachour, who'll be embarrassed here, but Philippe Vachour, your president of the Chamber of Commerce, they ran 3,000 businesses, ran through seminars to learn how to put this thing together. 3,000 businesses, no other region's done that. So you want a region that's self-sufficient, that pursues small, medium, and large-size industries. You can bring in outsiders, you can work with them jointly, but you got to be making very, very clear that this is a commons, and this will be treated as a commons, and that jointly the people of this entire region will continue to ensure how the data is used, how the pricing is controlled, how the webs are organized as a public, if you will, frame of reference. That's the responsibility you have. If you don't, it'll be taken away from you. But I know that that won't happen. Because I guess, I don't know how to put this. The sense of independence in this region was really heavy for me. You weren't going to take any crap from anybody. I don't know what it's about this region, but lots of times when we go into regions, you know, they're willing to sell out everything, give everything away so somebody will locate a data center. This region's not like this. There's some kind of a character ability in this region. You want to make sure that this region's solidarity is maintained, its sense of fraternity. And it's a good thing. This is why you've been successful.
By the way, some people here are very skeptical about our leaders, our political leaders. When you talked with them, do you feel they are convinced by your explanation? Do you feel they are aware of the emergency of of the ecological transition we need to pursue, like Emmanuel Macron or Donald Trump? Are they aware of that?
Let me start with the region. The region is aware of that. I've met with both presidents of the region, Pecheron and Mr. Bertrand, on many occasions. They're totally aware of what's being done, what has to be done, how it should be done, and all your local municipalities and all your political parties here. Everybody senses that something's happening here across political lines. I'm not worried about this region. On a national level in various countries, the problem is a lot of national leaders will say, we are climate change leaders, we are at the forefront, we're going to address the Paris Accords. Then they go on with business as usual and not much is changing. The change is going to happen from localities and regions, not necessarily from nation states. But the nation states can play a role. Here in France, you want your government, the national government, you call on them to create the new codes, the new regulations, the new standards, and the new incentives so that we don't have all of this bureaucratic logjam so we can scale up in the regions. That would be their mission. That's a big mission. Taking the old second industrial revolution codes, regulations, standards, and incentives, transforming it into a third industrial revolution because it's these old codes, regulations, and standards and subsidies that are keeping us from scaling this up to infrastructure. That's the mission of the government in Paris. The mission in each of the regions of France is to customize your own infrastructure based on this third industrial revolution architecture and cross-border here and cross-border with other countries.
Thank you. One part of the skepticism is our selfishness. So, for example, I have one question. How are we supposed to save the planet for the next century if the human's behavior remains as selfish as it is today? Do you think we are that selfish?
No, absolutely not. I wrote a book, which I don't expect any of you to read, actually. It's 680 pages. My wife said, are you crazy? No one's going to do that. But anyway, she probably was right. It's called The Empathic Civilization. You know what I found out? I found out that we've been sold a bill of goods about human nature for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. What the Enlightenment view of nature is that we are utilitarian, pleasure-seeking animals. We look out for our own selfish interests. We're competitive, we're predatory, and everything goes to what enables me to enjoy my life and have utility, correct? So what's interesting is this. At the cutting edge of cognitive science, they're learning something that anybody that's ever had a baby understands. When that little baby comes out of the womb, is that little baby, Freud said that little baby's looking for the breast because immediately everything is me, 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 and everyone else's utility, including the breast, and then everybody else. And that little baby is competitive, predatory, wants their own interests satisfied, and that's the nature of that they are. Wrong. That is an actual conception that is wrong. In the last 30 years, in the new study of cognitive science, we are learning that every baby, and this is true of other mammals, but especially of us, that nurses their young, we human beings are soft-wired for empathic distress. It's in our neural circuitry. It's actually in our neural circuitry. It isn't something up here. And that is, we have now discovered mirror neurons, and that's considered part of the empathy neurons. You know how they discovered this? Some scientists were in a laboratory in Italy, and there was a macaque monkey in the lab, and the macaque monkey was eating nuts. No, I'm sorry, stop it, that's wrong. There's the macaque monkeys in the lab, and they weren't eating nuts. A human being came in and saw some nuts on a table and started chewing on them, all right? And all of a sudden, the monkey was connected up to a screen. They began to see neurons light up in the monkey's brain while that monkey was watching that person eating the nuts. And what they found is that those were the same neurons that would light up if the monkey was eating the nut themselves. It's called mirror neurons. All human beings have it. We know that some of our primate friends have it. We suspect elephants, maybe dogs. But these are actual mirror neurons. So, for example, if you've ever been in an experience where somebody close to you or someone even not close to you was afraid, or they were in a desperate situation, or maybe they were in an emergency, or they're feeling happiness or disgust or suicidal, and all of a sudden you feel this experience like you're feeling it yourself. That's not up here. That's across your neural circuitry. It's ability to feel somebody else's joy, disgust, anger, fear, as if it were our own. It's in the neural circuitry. Then we start thinking about it, how we compassionately respond. This is what we are actually born for, and what we learn in psychology in attachment theory is it's about parenting. If a parent is empathic and is totally in tuned, both verbally and physically, to that baby, both parents, and when they allow the baby to know that there's always a safe place to come back, but also allow that baby to explore out so they're not helicopter parents, those children become very secure in their attachments and very empathic in life. Those parents who are either not consistent in their behavior, or they are cruel in their behavior, or they're not there, the children become frightful, and they either have avoidance behavior later in life, or they become frightened later in life. It's the same with a dog. How many of you have raised a dog? If you see somebody that beats a dog, what happens to the dog? Or is not consistent in feeding the dog or playing with the dog becomes either violent or very, very avoidant in behavior. So what I'm saying, and that this book, there's a 12-minute, has anyone seen this 12-minute cartoon on this book? You can see that, it's 12 minutes up on YouTube. But what we are learning now is that all through history, we have had an evolution of empathy, from blood ties to religious ties, to national identity, and now to biosphere consciousness, where people are, if you will, empathizing with people in larger affiliations. At forager hunters, their empathy was only to their blood ties. If you were on the next mountain, you were a demon. You weren't part of their blood ties. When you go to the great religions, people started identifying empathically with everyone in the same religion. So in first generation Rome, the weirdest thing was people came in from all over the empire where they had blood ties, and all of a sudden they're alone in Rome. They become Christians and they start kissing each other and calling each other brother and sister. That was the first time that had ever happened beyond blood ties, and it was weird. They began to identify empathically with a fictional family called their religion. Everybody in the religion was part of their family. When we got to the nation state, what was the new form of empathy? People began to identify with the French nation or the American nation. That began, and you had common education, common ceremonies, common celebrations, common sense of history. It was fictional, but now all French people kiss each other, but maybe they don't kiss the Germans or the Italians. So at each stage, we've seen empathy increase. In the 20th century, through associational and professional ties. Now, biosphere. We have young people who are identifying empathically with other human beings around the world. When you see people in those flooded areas, those hurricanes, don't you feel, and you see the little kids they're drowning in the waters, you can feel the thousands of miles away for them. So I think that we need to relook at what the human being's all about. If those primary qualities of empathy are not nurtured, you can turn out some pretty predatory, dangerous people in societies. Okay.
All right, last question. What can we do here, each of us, what can we do to contribute to this revolution?
All the 7 universities have been organized now for a number of years. I know that, what is it now, 275 high schools so more than that, have had an association together. Go back to your high schools. How many are high school here? How many are high school? How many are university? Go back to the university this afternoon. Don't wait till tomorrow. Find out what are they doing, and I'm going to tell you what they're doing is not fast enough. I love what they're doing. They're ahead of the game. You got to go back there with the energy of the student body. You got to work with them. They're moving to change curricula across the 7 universities. They're moving so the high schools can become part of this Internet of Things platform. Go back, form a committee if there isn't one, find out who at that university and high school is engaged in the Rev 3, and move tomorrow to get the whole student body involved on all these projects starting in the schools in this region. Is that it? So next time I come back here, a year from now, can we make another day to meet just with the people in this room? And I'm going to ask you to get up. I will be in the audience. I'm serious, with others. And I'm going to ask you to report to me, I'm serious, in a year from now, what you're doing, how you're progressing, how you're moving this. Because it's the energy among this generation of digital natives, you will make this world a better place to live in a more ecological society. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much.